Okay, ladies and gentlemen, all around the world, welcome to our first webinar in a series that we start today. We welcome you. Good afternoon, Europe. Good morning in the US. Good evening in Asia, wherever you are. We are broadcasting this from Berlin, where I am, and with my colleagues in our Paris office. So welcome, everybody. And we are very glad that you made the time today to find the time to reshuffle your priorities to focus on this topic around resilience. Coming back in a second, why resilience? First of all, I would like to introduce this series of webinars. We thought it's time to share our observations, share some of our convictions, share experiences that we made with some of you in different projects with our clients around topics. And it's not only the hype topics that we work on and that we observe, but there are a couple of underlying patterns where we see that it's not only one company fighting or struggling with a challenge, but topics where we see that it's around the globe and it's across all industry, all sectors, all companies, that we find similar discussions, find similar topics, find similar worries, and the first of them being resilience. The second one, in a couple of weeks, we will focus on convictions for change. We're not doing a webinar on change management, but it's more about what are the convictions that you need to have or that you nurture in a company culture, in order to survive change, in order to drive change, and in order to make change one of your levers. And the third topic that we already have on the list, and we will show the dates at the end of this webinar, are around new leadership positions, a new leadership approach. We had the situational leadership, we had the post-heroic leadership, and we have observed what leaders nowadays in a quite crazy world do in order to succeed. So now, why did we start with resilience? And we will see afterwards, Charles will lead us through these underlying observations where we see that why resilience is becoming more important. Monica, who is not on the screen yet, will walk you through the process that we identified. And Laetitia, who is there with us already, will share with all of you our approach of what resilience actually means, because it's a word that you read in every second LinkedIn post. But what does it mean? How can you nurture it? What are the pillars of resilience from both an individual perspective, but also from a team and organizational perspective? Now, at the end of the webinar, we will spend time on your questions. So throughout the entire presentation, feel free. On the bottom of your screen, you will find the question and answers, or F&A, or question-réponse, depending on your language setting. So feel free to post your questions. We will try to come back to most of them. If we don't cover them, we are happy to exchange with you also after this session. Now, resilience. Why is resilience important? Well, to make it simple, and it might sound too simple, is because the world is going nuts. And not, when we talk about that, it's not about the endless list of emails that you don't manage to do. It's not about the increasing pile of to-dos that we are incapable of covering. It's not about surviving the workload and avoiding the burnout. That's part of resilience, but it's not the full story. Resilience is more about the ability to deal with the unexpected. Resilience is the ability to survive with things that are going out there as an organization, as a team, and as an individual. And in order to look more into these different aspects, what's going on and what drives the need for resilience, I hand over to Charles. Charles, just to highlight the couple of observations that we made throughout the years and projects. What's going on there?
Well, thank you, Andreas. Well, the title speaks for itself. Survive the unexpected, and as as a kind of illustration for that, let me just read a very simple statement that I found on the web a few days ago. We are not in the headlines, given the strong position of online travel agencies such as Booking or Private Travel. However, we are developing this channel and we are one of the historical players in the sector in the digital transformation. That statement was issued by Hervé Vitas 18 months ago, and he was at the time the CEO of Thomas Cook. And to be back to this statement, survive the unexpected, probably Thomas Cook 15 years ago wouldn't expect to see Booking.com appearing on the market. And Thomas Cook did not survive. So yes, the world of a lot of companies is today under threat. Of course, because of digital, we know that by heart, but not only because of the digital revolution, disruption, whatever you want to call it. What I propose is to walk you through a certain number of the threats that impact, as Andreas said, that impact the world, not only one particular country, not only one particular sector of industry, but by and large, the whole planet. Well, the first one, of course, is the digital revolution, disruption, whatever. It's a new continent. I mean, into which this virtual continent, into which people converse, trade, exchange, build, invent, innovate. So there's a lot of activities that never really came to life, to real life, that are operated in this continent, and we are all of us moving closer and closer each and every day to this continent. Of course, we understand a lot of industries, a lot of services are strongly impacted, but not only, because it doesn't have to do only with business, it has to do with life. It has to do with biology, because we are now able to use the code. We have been able to decode our own code, our DNA. That is not a change. It's not a revolution. It's an anthropological disruption. Never, ever, any human entity has ever been able to decipher his own or its own code, but more than that, to intervene on that code. And we all heard about, transhumanity and all that sort of things. Serious matter. It will happen. Who will regulate? Who knows? There is no binding body at the time that can regulate that. So yes, digital is a great opportunity. It entails a certain number of threats that we have to consider. Globalization, that's an old story for us because we were born on cultural differences and cultural shock and all that sort of things when in the 90s companies were going international and were experiencing those shocks. But it won't, that's not a two-way road. We're engaged into a road of globalization that will not stop simply because no one is going to shoot down the satellites. No one is going to cut the cables that are at the bottom of the oceans. No one is going to, destroy all these devices and infrastructures. So we're here to communicate, and communication will go on. Now, communication can be great, harmonious, fruitful. It can be extremely violent. And we know that, and we see it every day. Just switching on the TV every night, we know that people can get into huge level, immense level of violence because of this confrontation. Climate change, I think very, very few people now arguing against climate and global warming. That's probably a very bad news for everyone, except maybe northern Siberia, which may become a very good place for summer or winter vacation. But we're all going to suffer this. And the economical geographical, migration, weather impacts on this climate change is going to increase as we walk through that century. Democracy fragility. On that little map, I hope that you can see it in detail, but you've got a green part, which basically is the traditional Western democracy with our principles, human rights, and all that, which have framed the way societies have developed and cooperate. On the blue side, you have the illiberal democracies. You have China, Russia, part of Africa, and you can see the confrontation. It's very visual. You can see it, the blue and the green, and they are looking at each other. And in particular, at the moment, we see that the relation is not that easy, and it's not going to improve very, very quickly. Hopefully, the blue is going to get a bit green, but my guess is that the green may, yes, incorporate some blue in the next future, and that will impact on economies. It will impact on economies because economies are dependent on the politics, and the politics are and will be confrontational for a while. And the last one is about authority, which is, be it in the family, in the organizations, in the companies, in countries, we see that authority as a statement, as a basis, as a value, as a conviction has been eroded over the past, I would say, 50 years, declining slowly. At the same time, people are now able to voice their request, to voice and organize their request through the social networks. We've seen the Arab Springs and all these movements that allow people to not impose, but to weight much more heavily on the destiny of their country, their family, their companies. So these are the kind of things. One thing about those threats and this situation, that it's global. It's not only one country or the other. We are all facing that situation and the world as it is evolving at the moment and for the next future. Now, facing that, I develop resilience. I'm not going to change the world with my team, but at least I may be willing to survive these very difficult situations and environments. So, the answer is simple. A person or a group with good resilience have the ability to bounce back more quickly with less stress than someone of a group with resilience is less developed. Remember the statement I wrote about Thomas Cook. More quickly, bounce back more quickly. And that's one of the key. And so if you can maintain the speed, the pace that is necessary to catch up with the innovation pace, in particular in the digital environment, then you have a competitive advantage. And when we look at what could decrease, drain, hinder the capacity of resilience of your team, we took those data from a survey from Sarah Bond and Gillian Shapiro, who are two British consultants. And this is what they came up with. And first thing is when my resilience tends to decrease when I am managing difficult relationship, politics in the workplace. So that's politics basically hinders cooperation. And we all talk about cooperation and the need to have people breaking silos and so on. So politics, a difficult relationship tend to hinder that. Well, the volume and pace at work stretches me to my own limit, fatigue. Every day we heard, and back to what Andrea's saying, yes, the burden, the day-to-day life is more and more difficult to survive. When I'm criticized personally, negative emotions, destruction of self-confidence, all this tends to decrease, in particular, personal resilience. When my work takes me outside of my comfort zone, That's the uncertainty. Will I be as effective in a new environment as I have been in the one I knew and I know? Not obvious, and that anxiety raises. So we see that, and that's spectacular, because in a sense we see that in this survey the kind of things we hear almost every day at the cafeteria. So yes, it's quite relevant to take action on that, which is what we did. What we did 6 years ago, we started to think in terms of resilience. I must say at the time, everyone was asking us, what's resilience? But today, it's almost everywhere. We did three things. One is we surveyed. So we called our clients, we met our clients, we heard about their stories, what did they do in order to go through a very difficult period of time. And we ran a pretty large questionnaire on a large group. And from this material, we drew a conclusion and designed a model, which we call the 4 energies of resilience. And Laetitia will tell you why we use the word resilient energy and not levers or things like this. Energies, because you need it, and tools approach, in order to be in a position to implement and deliver a service to our clients and help them, support them, accompany them in the development of their resilience. And basically, it's based on a questionnaire. Monica will talk about it. There's an index which allows you to know where you stand with respect to your index of resilience. Is it high? Is it low? And a workshop to draw a conclusion from that in order to put together something like a resilience development plan. So that's basically what we did. And I'm going to give floor to Laetitia, who is going to walk us through the model and how to implement it.
Okay, so what were the conclusions of our survey? Our survey has shown that resilient individuals and teams are able to activate 4 key energies and mobilize them when required. Each of these energies are essentials, yet not sufficient for sustainable resilience. Charles has mentioned the fact that we have viewed energy as a basis and not pillars or levers, simply because it's really about calling for the brain energy, the heart energy, the leg energy, to think right, to challenge one's assumptions, to get moving and to make it happen. So it requires that kind of emotional, physical, intellectual energy. Let's look first at collective team resilience. The first energy is about the beauty of clarity. And I'd like to take an example in order to illustrate that beauty of clarity, which is the one of a merger between 2 petrochemical companies. At the time it was announced, it was presented in the press and to the employees as a merger of equals. But the very next day after the announcement, basically the logo of one of the company was cut in the hall in front of everyone. It had a very disastrous impact on people. They wondered, who are we then? What is our ambition? What are our objectives? Are these of the previous group we belong to, or are these of the new group? But by the way, who is the new group? What is going to be our contribution to these objectives? And basically, is there anything that is going to change in the way we work? So as you can imagine, that created a lot of stress and people got completely paralyzed. We may believe that the initial intention, by saying that it was a merger of equals, was a positive one in order to please everyone. But the impact was that trust in the new group, trust in the management was destroyed. That is the reason why the beauty of clarity is fundamental because it refers to the ability of people to focus on the essentials, to focus on what they are meant to be doing. And since they are clear on their practices, on their processes, on their role, they are able to take the right decision at the right time and manage any surprises when they arise. So it's much more powerful than a checklist for crisis management, because anyway, you don't know what kind of crisis will occur, and therefore the checklist might completely be challenged. But having this compass of where do we go, what is animating us, is much more fundamental. The second energy is about the power of drive. And the illustration I would like to take is this of an international pharmaceutical group we have been working with. At the time, they had decided to expand their market in Brazil. Unfortunately, at that time in Brazil, there was a huge pandemic affecting particularly children. And it was quite a difficult time for the company because it became obvious that they wouldn't be able to do anything to cure these children. And it was both negative for the image of this new player on the market, but also completely demotivating for the employees who felt useless, although their role was to contribute to saving lives. Yet, the founder of the company declared, "We'll have a factory ready to produce vaccines in 1 month's time." And they did it. And basically, that was the illustration of the power of drive, which described the extent to which individuals in a team or in a company, in that particular example, were able to fight for their convictions and really make it happen. They are able to demonstrate a strong emotional and physical resistance to difficulty, and they are also able to commit to constant learning. They are able to consider what is it that we can learn both from our successes and from our failure, and take distance from the turmoil. The third energy is about the magic of inspiration. You probably all know these bubble wrap, these double film with little bubbles of air encapsulated between the double film, which enables us to wrap and protect some fragile items, such as when we move from one home to another to protect our dishes. Well, maybe you don't know, but I'm going to tell you, the company who has invented this bubble wrap was a company in the paper and cardboard industry. The numbers were getting down year after year. The market shares were shrinking year after year, and they basically knew that they had to do something in order to survive. Most companies under that kind of threats will have a tendency or to get completely paralyzed, completely blocked, or become frantic. They will do even more of what they have been doing in the past. But that particular company was able to think out of the box and completely change their product. And this is what we mean by the magic of inspiration. This is the extent to which people will question the way they consider the world around them. They will question their own assumptions. They will also refuse fatality, think out of the box, and draw energy from new ideas. This is the ability to be also taking energy from new ideas, taking a lot of pleasure from inventing new things and improvising in the face of difficulty. The very last energy is about the bonds of solidarity. Because you may have a team with individuals that, taken separately from one another, are resilient on their individual side. But it doesn't make a resilient team. It's only because people are going to be supporting one another, helping one another, that they are going to be resilient as a team. And an illustration can be this French company with whom we have been working a long time ago in the insurance industry. And the team with which we have worked particularly was the fire insurance team. Obviously, they had been bought by an English group, and they were wondering, what are we going to be doing? 200 people turning to their team leaders and asking all sorts of questions and expecting different answers. But the fact is that the leader had no clue. He didn't know how to answer those questions. But what he knew was that he couldn't let his 200 people in the dark, and he couldn't let these people feel hopeless. So he had organized every day at 5 o'clock a tea party where people will get together, share their concerns, raise their questions, imagine potential scenarios, and imagine how to face those different scenarios together. And by doing that, the leader basically created a team that was solid enough that they were able to then manage much more fluidly and with much more solidarity the next bad news that were coming up. So we're talking here about the extent to which people are going to proactively support one another, help one another, are very clear on what they can expect from themselves, but also from their colleagues. They are able also to build some strong networks outside the organization in order to make sure a lot of information are exchanged and a lot of solutions are brainstormed all together. One thing I would like to add about the bonds of solidarity, it requires time and space. It's not going to be addressed in a quick fix action. So if you imagine, let's have a team building somewhere green and somewhere where is the sun, and that's done, we're okay, we can move on. No, this is not going to work that way. You might actually reduce your budget, yet invest sufficient time, sufficient energy, and ongoing investment in order to really address the bonds of solidarity. So this was for the collective resilience. Let's have a look at the individual resilience, which is a translation of all those 4 energies. Usually under stress and under pressure, individuals tend to get completely paralyzed and feel hopeless. The idea with clarity and giving clarity is in order for people to take back control over the problem and formulate it in a way that it's going to look like a manageable problem, something that they can handle now. So what we're doing is that we're helping individuals to take distance and to separate the facts from the emotions, the reality from the limiting beliefs. And from there, they're able to look at the situation in a much more powerful way. And they are able then to generate options, i.e. generate as many solutions as possible. And there, the purpose is not only to find some proper solutions, but it's also to give the feeling to people that they have the freedom to act upon the problem, that they are in charge, that they can do it. And this is where we are going to support people into firmly yet constructively formulate their needs. We are going to support them into managing heavy workload and pressure. Yet, you can be very inventive into formulating options. If you do not have the energy to implement those options, it's useless. So it is important that we connect then people to the inner sense of confidence in themselves to make it happen. And this is where we are going to work heavily on limiting beliefs for people to recognize what could be blocking them from moving forward. And finally, also reconnecting, to positive energy and to successes in order to take a firm and constructive action forward. Finally, we've mentioned that with solidarity earlier on, If you are trying as hard as possible to face and to manage difficulties all by yourself, there is a time when you're going to be exhausted and that you will not be able to manage it. So it's important to recognize who are the people who can support me and for what kind of challenge. What are my networks and how can I build them as well as nurture them in the long run? So this was for the individual resilience. Now, obviously, through the examples that I have shared, you can see already who can benefit from this intervention. Large groups, companies, but also departments. And in that case, we will also trickle down to the teams in a manageable size, 8 to 15 people, and finally, individuals. Now I'm going to hand over to Monica.
I am going to leave my place to Monica. So goodbye, everybody.
And so Monica is going to give you a word about the process. How do these people, large groups, team, and individual, actually benefit from this?
Yes, so we basically have designed a 5-step process, starting off with, first of all, a face-to-face meeting with a team leader. The idea behind it is to understand a bit better what are the contextual challenges that that group is facing, helping us to basically be better prepared to accompany them throughout that process. A second step is actually interviews with representative sample of team members. Why? Is because this, as an intervention, is a first start of building awareness for elements that make resilience, increase or, on the other hand, block resilience right now. For us, it is also to gather some of the critical business examples where they've been facing tough moments and when they noticed themselves resilience wasn't yet up to speed. Next step is really to launch our online questionnaire, which is a 36-question questionnaire. It takes around 15 to 20 minutes to fill in, and is looking at 3 different levels. On one hand, these are questions that are structured around the I perspective. So what is the individual also able to contribute? There are elements that are structured around the leader's perspective, i.e. what is it that they see about what the leader needs to do and contributes to resilience. And the third perspective is actually the collective, i.e. the team perspective. So 3 different elements as part of it. Then once we have the results, this is about organizing a 2-day workshop where we identify exactly what the team can build on, what's already there as a strength, but also the elements where the biggest gap is right now, i.e. what they still need to develop. Typically what we have is a series of exercises, collective co-creation work where they actually reinforce these elements that need improvement and conclude with a concrete action plan, which we would then follow up in the next step around 2 months later with a Skype meeting. So 5 steps in the overall process. Just looking a little bit further into what the report looks like. I mean, you have different elements. We've mentioned a couple of times our resilience index, which is a tangible way for the team to see where do they stand right now. What is the current score, if you like, but also to track progress over time. And typically you would see that in 6 to 8 months after the initial measure, you can replot to what extent the overall index has improved. Just a few more impressions of how we structured the report, which gives an idea and a more detailed view then of each of those energies that Laetitia has highlighted. And at the end, plotting where focus should be made. Here you have basically what we are versus what we need, i.e. we compare current reality with what is important for success and thus resilience in the future. So these are some impressions just about the report. Now you might question, what's the benefit of all of that? Well, in fact, very simple. Number one is a concrete, tangible measure. something that all the teams can relate to, because it's not just a qualitative, very subjective field. But the next important element is also to align the energies around what's already there, i.e. what can we celebrate as well as part of our qualities within the team today, but also what needs focus on which we would target our energies on, and thus build and follow up on a very clear resilience plan. What's important to mention here is a strong belief that we all, as individuals as well as teams, carry in us the capability of resilience, as long as we have developed access to all these energies that we've looked at. So with all of this, I hand over to Andreas to talk a little bit about who we are.
Thank you, Charles, Laetitia, Monica. Before we move on to a couple of your questions, we also wanted to spend a few words on who we are, talking a bit about the Pawlik Group and ICM. Now, before I go through what we do, I would like to highlight one point, which is basically one conviction that we share across the Pawlik Group, and that is that it's people who make it happen. You can have the best strategies, you can have the best organizational design, innovative products. Without the people, it won't happen. And therefore, all of our areas where Pawlik works on, we follow this. We want to find you the right people, we want to develop these people, and we want to put together the right cultural and organizational setup that people can operate in. And when we look a bit on what we do, it's basically on 4 different levels. We work in projects with you on the corporate and the company culture. This might be in mergers and acquisitions as the standard one, but that can be also a new organization, a new strategy, a disruption, or simply a new CEO joining, saying, okay, our company will be redesigned. And we accelerate this transformation. We work with organizational units, that's a bit artificial, with business units, departments. And in most of the companies we are in, people refer to these units as silos. So we help organizations and the people within in order to cooperate in a different way. And that leads very quickly to the teams level, where we work with teams, and I honestly hate the term of team building. The more lasting effect in order to build solid teams and increase their effectiveness, but also their resilience, is a team alignment on a couple of factors that really matter for a good team. And finally, teams are made up of individuals. So we also support and work with individuals. We have developed our own assessment tool with the Max Planck Institute in order to not only measure strengths and weaknesses, but also where do they come from and how can we develop them? And how can we strengthen the leadership that then fits into the corporate culture? So that's in a couple of words, the different levels we work with you. With many of you already, we had the pleasure. Now, before we tackle the first question, and perhaps we can move on the next slide, is if you have further questions, want to discuss some points of what we illustrated today, feel free to reach out, either the Paris office, Monica, but also Charles and Laetitia. Reach out to our German entity, either in Hamburg, Astrid, or me directly, or over LinkedIn. The channels are multiple, so feel free and we are happy to respond. The next events are in November and December. You have the dates there. We are, of course, sending out a couple of invitations so that you don't forget about us. But before we close this session, I would like to perhaps give you time. Use the Q&A button on the lower screen if you didn't do yet. Put in your questions. One of the questions that I saw and that are typical is, and that I want to pragmatically already tackle, is the question on time and money, which is a usual one. I think Monica mentioned it already a little bit. How much time does it take in order to move forward, to change the level of these four energies? And we have observed it's actually during the first workshop that it has an impact already. And the first workshop can take place after 4 weeks. We have a couple of interviews, a questionnaire, and we can kick off the session. Now, the sustainable effect will take a little bit longer. Now, but the costs, we have the consultant answer to this. That depends. It depends on the size of your team. Is it a full department? How many people do you want to involve? It can start with like 8,000 euros for a smaller team and can go up, of course, limitless. Be our guest, but it really depends on the setup and the challenges you're facing.
I also see another question regarding how quickly can resilience be changed. This is, of course, also a rather difficult question. But what we typically see, nevertheless, is that something is already happening as part of the workshop. Even prior, I've mentioned when we run first interviews, all these preparations is already an act of an intervention in itself. So you'll see behaviors change typically dramatically within the group setup after the workshop and even during the workshop already. And typically we would take a second measure, as I said, 6 to 8 months after, in order to see as well progress. So you tend to see rather significant changes at that time frame.
There's a question also on examples of activities we can run on the 4 pillars during the workshop. So concretely on the beauty of clarity, we have workshops organized around storytelling and imagining really the story that people can tell one another, but also outside of the team. Short, concise, powerful, with is and all of that kind of thing that reinforces the feeling of belonging and also of clarity of the message. Another example can be on the power of drive. When it comes to the power of drive, it's really assessing the kind of beliefs that the team has all together as a group, all the individuals that come probably from the past of what they have been doing so far and how they see the future. And it's really about assessing together, are these beliefs helpful, really helping us to move forward, or are they limiting us? And how could we actually transform these beliefs and raise new beliefs that are going to be trigger for new actions? So that's it.
Yes. Good. I think there's a last question coming in right now about, well, to what extent does the manager need actually to be accompanied separately as part of this process? Good question. Actually, it is the case. It's needed. Typically, what we would do is once we have the results, that there is a prior preparation and potentially in parallel to various actions that are being followed up of the workshop, a parallel coaching with the manager. So that typically is something that we tend to organize. Yes. I see there is another question that just came in.
So the ideal change process happens ahead of problems when all 4 energies are in a maximum point. How do you act when the situation is deteriorated already?
Yes.
I'm not sure I get the question.
Let me perhaps react. It's if everything is fine and you do a change, it's easier. But very, very often we start to change when it's too late or when things are already got bumpy. And many changes, we come back to this in the next webinar also when we come on the convictions for change, is to build up the resilience as an antidote to the downsides of change. Because in change, you also see the need for clarity, you need to bring up the bonds of solidarity in change in order to go through together, and not just each individual of a department or of a team doing the change alone. You need quite a hell of an energy in order to move forward in a change, in order to also move fast, because otherwise cynicism starts. And change, especially nowadays, is not an easy one, because the answers are not that easy. So you need a bit of a creativity and out-of-the-box thinking of what are the right answers. And very often, even the leaders of teams, they don't have the final answer at the beginning. So we bring this basically into the change process in order to nurture the resilience. Now, of course, if there is a team really devastated, we would recommend to first work a bit on nurturing the energy in the team before kicking off the huge change initiatives. But it's then a process.
But I would say it's absolutely typical that there has been some difficulty experienced within the team, that an ideal change process was probably very unlikely. So we tend to actually run this process in a situation where there are already some anecdotes of things that have gone very wrong. So we work with the material that we get.
Okay. Thank you, everybody. Laetitia, any additional point?
No, just wondering if there was any last question.
Any last questions? And don't hesitate to send them to us if some things come afterwards. Thank you, everybody, for your time. We will reach out to you afterwards also for the next sessions. Please also, if you have colleagues who are interested, just spread the news. You're welcome to make our publicity. Thank you for joining. Thanks to everybody for your questions. Thanks to the team, and see you next time. Bye.
Bye.